Isn't our boy beautiful?
Yeah, I can't believe he's already going to have to start saving for a down payment on a house.
Yes, you will. You'll be a 60-year-old first-time home buyer.
Would you be able to, describe what inflation is? Do you feel as though you have a good understanding of what inflation is and why it exists and all these things?
I would say absolutely not.
This city, this country, this entire continent seems to have a massive problem. Let's imagine you lived where I currently do, in Toronto, Canada. Let's then imagine that your household earns about $196,000 per year. Sounds pretty good, right? But what if you wanted to buy one of these, a detached home? Well, you wouldn't be able to. At least not for a long time. According to the Housing Affordability Monitor released by the National Bank of Canada this year, if you were part of a household earning $196,000 per year and saving 10% of your income each year, which is about double the historical average by the way, it would take you 27 years to save enough money for a down payment on a home. 27 years? That seems insane to me. Are asset prices really this inflated? If so, how did this happen? Are times really much harder for my generation? Or are we blinded by a sense of entitlement? And most of all, what can we do to ensure that we don't fall behind financially in all of this? Well, one thing I know for sure is vlogging in public still makes me very uncomfortable, so let's go back to my apartment and see if we can unpack all of this. So it seems like in many places around the world, the middle class dream is dying. People feel as though it is no longer possible to be able to follow in the footsteps of the previous generation. And I think one of the main reasons for this is it appears to many people that incomes are stagnating while the cost of living is rising dramatically. Is this really the case? Do you personally feel this way? Well, I really wanted to try and investigate this. So I thought a good place for me to start was by asking some of my extended family members about their experiences in their generation trying to build a good life. Thinking back to that time, how realistic did it feel for you to be able to do something like buy a house?
Okay. Well, I think I found it very realistic because I was following in my parents' footsteps.
When I graduated, started my career, got married, and that was kind of the order of things happened, because that's the order things were supposed to happen.
You had certain steps or stages in life that you kind of went through.
Buying a house was the next logical step, and it wasn't something that was difficult to do at the time. Housing was relatively affordable, and both my wife and I had good incomes.
I knew I had the security of this job, so saving money was not an issue.
Despite the fact that interest rates at that time on mortgages were 13.75%, we still went ahead and did it, and it was still manageable.
When I think of today now for younger people, I think it's a lot more challenging.
If we were to do this today, different story.
One of the key themes I pulled from talking to them was it seems there may have been this general shift in priorities between generations. It seems as though the previous generation may have followed more of a cookie cutter approach to building a good life. You find a good job, you get married, buy a house, raise a family. But now it may be true that my generation has a wider array of priorities. For example, I highly value flexibility and freedom, which was one of the main reasons that I quit my stable 9-to-5 job. But is it possible that this shift in priorities, which allows us to have multiple different opportunities that the past generation may have not perceived at the time, is it possible that this shift has also led to us experiencing life events at different times than the previous generation? All of my exploration so far is, of course, anecdotal. My family members that I talk to all grew up in relatively the same area and were obviously from the same family, so I definitely don't think this sample of information speaks to the entire picture. And in order to get a better understanding of what's actually going on here, we're going to need to be able to dive deeper. And I think a great place to do that is to consider that no matter the difference in priorities between generations, when we look at the data, the cost of living has undoubtedly risen, and quite dramatically in some areas in particular, between generations. Let's dive into this together a little bit more. One particularly interesting analysis I came across was done by Better Dwelling, who used data from the Bank of Canada Housing Affordability Monitor. Now, they found that on average since the year 2000, so that's about 21 years of average data, it would take someone earning the median household income in Toronto about 5.1 years to be able to afford a down payment for a house. So that actually sounds pretty reasonable, right? Like 5 years, that's not too bad, especially for a metropolitan area. But that's just the long-term average. If we look at today's number as of June 2021, it would currently take you 27 years to be able to afford a down payment. That length of time has quintupled past the average, which means unequivocally that the cost of owning a home has risen much faster than incomes. Now, you can clearly see here that this is area dependent. There are still places where housing is quite affordable, like in Calgary, for example, only 3 years for a down payment. That's very affordable, and we'll talk more about this later on. What I want to focus on right now is, if the cost of housing is increasing much faster than incomes, the crazy thing is that housing is still extremely affordable to so many people. Now, you might be thinking, what? I can't afford a home. Who can afford a home? And the hard truth is that a lot of people can. In fact, a ton of people can. Let me show you how that's true, and then I'll show you why that's true. The how can be simply explained through supply and demand. At its heart, the issue around housing affordability is incredibly simple. Too much money chasing too few houses. In other words, the supply of housing is incredibly small compared to the demand. In fact, a report done by Scotiabank this year not only clearly points out that housing supply is the issue, but shows just how bad it is, at least for Canadians like myself. It turns out that Canada has the fewest number of houses per 1,000 residents of any G7 country. Fantastic. So this to me prompts two further questions. The first being, where is all this money coming from that's chasing so few houses? And two, why is there such a massive shortage of supply? I think the answer to the first question lies in the past 10 years. Since 2010, the S&P 500 stock market index has gained 380% with dividends reinvested. The S&P Case-Shiller Home Price Index has increased by 68%. And if we select an extreme example within the housing market, a metropolitan city like Toronto has seen home prices rise by 160%. All of this to say, if you've happened to be an asset owner over the past 10 years, you've probably seen your net worth increase dramatically. Now, the next question is, who owns these assets? Well, over the past same 10 years, the top 1% of the wealthiest members of society in the United States have grown their ownership of total assets to just under 30% of all assets. And the bottom 50% of society, as measured by wealth percentile, has seen their ownership of total assets decline to about 5% of all assets. So to answer the question, why is there so many dollars chasing so few houses, even though it seems like many members of society can't even afford a house in the first place? Well, a plausible explanation seems to be that asset owners, so the members of society who own assets, have seen their wealth grow dramatically over the past short while and now have a lot more capital to be able to allocate as they see fit. And this, of course, is further exacerbated by record low interest rates. Let me show you a really simple example so you can see how interest rates can make such a big impact in asset prices. A $237,000 mortgage at a 7% interest rate leaves you with a monthly payment of $1,678 per month. So this is to say that $1,678 per month could buy you a home around $250,000 if we factor in a 5% down payment. But if we lower that interest rate from 7% to 2%, watch what happens. Now, a $237,000 mortgage only would require a payment of $1,006. So if $1,600 a month is what you can afford much more home now. How much more? About 60% more home. Let me show you. You could now afford a $400,000 home because after making a 5% down payment, you'd be paying a monthly payment of $1,610. So this home is now actually slightly cheaper on a monthly payment basis than the $250,000 home, all because interest rates are low. So down payment money aside, lowering the interest rate makes housing much more affordable in terms of the monthly mortgage payment. So this increases the demand side of the housing equation. And the supply side of the equation is probably not going to be getting any better anytime soon. And that's because building new housing developments is notoriously difficult. It takes a really long period of time. And it's really, really hard to do in metropolitan areas. People are very, very reluctant to allow large developments to happen. Construction is annoying. People don't like their neighborhoods to be disturbed. If you've heard the term NIMBYism before, not in my backyard, that plays a huge role in the housing market because people just don't want that going on in their neighborhoods. They don't want to invite this densification in. In a nutshell, we as humans are really bad at sacrificing short-term comfort for the long-term gains of society. And to make matters worse, the low interest rates that I talked about earlier probably also aren't changing anytime soon because it seems that central banks are pretty much okay with letting inflation run a little bit hot over the next little while, and it doesn't seem like they're going to be raising interest rates, at least dramatically, in response to that. So ultimately, this leaves us with an incredibly lopsided battle between supply and demand for housing. Now, here's what is especially troubling to me. The bottom 50% of society only owns 5% of the assets, which means that over the past 10 years, they did not experience that same massive increase in wealth as the asset owners did. And in fact, if you look at real wages adjusted for inflation, they've only grown 8% in that time period. All of this to say, those of us who own little to no assets and rely on wages to pay their expenses have probably fallen far behind the members of society who do own assets and who have sources of income outside of employment income. Now, I'm not an economist, but it appears there's a pretty serious problem here, and it looks like it's only going to continue getting worse. I certainly don't know a perfect solution to this. The problem is very multifaceted. But at least what I want to try and do is highlight the importance of all members of society being able to own assets. Fortunately, today, owning one type of asset in particular is exponentially easier than it ever has been in the past, and that is owning financial assets, particularly in the stock market. Now, I would really encourage you, if you have not already, to learn about investing in the stock market and growing your wealth through financial assets. I can obviously recommend my channel as a place to do that. You can look through the library of videos and pick out ones that seem like they might be helpful to you. I've really tried my best to make this information as accessible and entertaining as possible. And in terms of home ownership, the hard truth as it stands today is home ownership might mean relocating yourself. Earlier, I showed Calgary as an example of a place where someone could live very affordably in my country. Now, obviously, relocating yourself is undesirable for a multitude of reasons. I mean, I myself am choosing not to relocate myself and instead live in Toronto, even though it's very expensive, because I love living here. I have friends here. I don't want to leave, so I'm not. But at some point, I might have to say to myself, and you might have to say to yourself, that enough's enough. I need to find somewhere that's, in line with my financial goals. And really, the point that I'm trying to make with relocation is that there are still places in the world where it is affordable to live. I want you to have some hope that there is a place where you can afford a home, because I really believe that is true. And also, entering the housing market in an area where the cost of living is lower may allow you to then build up your wealth very rapidly, so that one day, maybe you can transition yourself back to the area that you came from, that you love, that you really want to be there. Ultimately, it's my hope with the library of videos that I've created that you can understand how to get yourself to a place where you can create a gap between your income and your expenses, so then you can save money and then understand how to use that saved money to then purchase assets that will appreciate over time. Inflation in the cost of living, in the assets people own, and in the money supply itself has been and will continue to be a prominent issue that our society faces. And it seems like at this point, the institutions of our society have been relatively inept at being able to solve this problem, and may have only served to actually make them worse. That means the only person who's really in your court is you. And that's the hard truth. Oh, and me, as much as I can be in your court in whatever infinitesimally small role I can play in your personal finance journey. So, in closing this video, I hope I have impressed upon you the importance of owning assets, while at the same time not painting too pessimistic of a vision of the future. I could have sugarcoated it, but I didn't. I gave it to you straight with no chaser. So let's keep fighting the good fight. Let's get our money up. Let's get some assets under our belts. I don't know the perfect path to a more equitable society, but I hope that this knowledge, the knowledge of the power of owning assets, is at least part of the way to get there. So with all of this said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.